So we're here today after a very long and exciting journey between different members from the ACKnowl-EJ project. We're in Turkey in our last meeting of ACKnowl-EJ, and we had a conversation yesterday about the need to make sure that we don't miss an important part of our story in this project, which has been how two of the members of the project, which are Kalpavriksh and Grupo Confluencias, how we came together here, but we were actually doing similar things in different parts of the world and in different continents, and
without knowing about
each other. So it's pretty amazing that ACKnowl-EJ brought us together to find out about our respective work, and to find out the coincidence of our respective work, and also to have the chance to learn from each other, and hopefully to be able to continue growing together in this initiative. So we thought it was nice to make sure that this story is told in the video that we're putting together of the project, and maybe we can share with the people that are going to watch this lovely coincidence that life gives us, and magic. So
yeah.
Maybe do you want to start telling us a bit about what we're talking about here when we say this, that we're doing similar things? What is it that we are doing similar?
Okay, maybe we should start with introducing ourselves. So, Mirna, who are you? What are you doing?
Bien, mi nombre es Mirna Inturias, yo soy boliviana, soy socióloga, investigadora, trabajo mucho tiempo con pueblos indígenas y la temática de transformación de conflictos ambientales como parte del Grupo Confluencias, que es un grupo que venimos reuniéndonos hace unos 15 años trabajando la temática de transformación de conflictos ambientales.
So Mirna was saying that her name is Mirna Inturias. She's from Bolivia. She works at Nur University and she forms part of Grupo Confluencias, and she specializes in the topic of indigenous peoples and conflict transformation. And as part of Grupo Confluencias, we have been for the last 15 years trying to put together a sort of methodological and conceptual framework to understand environmental conflicts, but from a transformative perspective, and to be able to evaluate how that transformation is taking place. And my name is Iokine Rodriguez. I'm from Venezuela. I currently work at the University of East Anglia in the School of International Development, but so part of my work there has been based on what we've been doing in Grupo Confluencias, and this is what we both bring to the ACKnowl-EJ project, what we want to share with you.
Great. So I come from India. I'm Ashish Kothari. I work with a group called Kalpavriksh, which has been around for the last 40 years working on environment and development and livelihoods issues, and also help to coordinate a process we call the Vikalp Sangam, which is the alternatives confluence, which is trying to bring together organizations, movements, people in India who are working on radical alternatives to the current model of development and the structures of capitalism and patriarchy and so on. So yeah, I think actually, like you said, it's actually been quite amazing that this project brought us together, because so many things that we realize is coincidental and happy coincidence. For instance, you say Grupo Confluencias and we have alternatives confluence. You calling your framework of analysis as the conflict transformation framework. We're calling it the alternatives transformation format. So it's like both of us looking at transformation in society and in communities, away from the extractivist, destructive model of development and so on, towards much more justice, much more sustainability. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other coincidences also that we have. But to me, actually, this really struck me as something amazing.
Yeah.
And then, as we worked over the last 3.5 years, we realized how much more actual complementarity was there between the frameworks. So this is something we've talked about. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more.
Well, I mean, I think we're both. It was interesting that in these two different continents, we are both trying to help understand how change towards, in a way, a more just and sustainable world takes place, but also to help people that are undergoing pressures and are suffering from development activities or conservation practices. How can we help them themselves and ourselves understand what are the limitations and also what are the learnings that people undergo in those struggles. From our perspective, we found that there's also a lot of naive discourse nowadays about how those changes take place, and need to really understand and capture and explain, not only give more depth to the understanding of those changes, but also to help people that are going to go in those struggles to refine their understanding, but also to help them re-strategize. And I think you're probably, I just think it's interesting that we were both trying to develop these frameworks to help give understanding and to help us create spaces for discussion about these things. And also the other interesting coincidence is that you were talking, or you're talking about the global worldviews dialogue as a need to help people create the spaces of reflection, but also to share experiences and learn. And
especially amongst communities.
Amongst themselves.
Yes.
And from our side as well, we have been trying to put together a project to help indigenous peoples develop exchanges in the light of this framework. Because this is what they have been asking us, that they need more space, that they would really want, and they don't have really the funds or the means, or sometimes even the frameworks to think. When we say framework, is a bit of a tough, sort of very too much of a academic word, but it helps to provide some methodological ways to go into this topic, because it's not something that people normally talk about. So that's another nice coincidence, is that you were, and now happily we're trying to do that together, so that's the way that we can grow.
So it might help, maybe if Mirna can explain to us how the conflict transformation framework developed, from what contexts, in which communities.
So, Ashish, sería bueno si pudiese explicarnos un poco, compartir cómo surgió el marco de transformación, desde dónde nació, sí, encuentra el origen del marco.
Pasa que nuestras realidades, la realidad latinoamericana tiene muchos puntos de encuentro con la tremenda realidad de la India. Creo que tenemos pasados comunes, toda nuestra historia de colonialidad nos une, y nuestra intensa diversidad. Somos países intensos en diversidad, en experiencias, diversidad biológica, ¿no? Latinoamérica de principio a fin tiene múltiples facetas de ecosistemas, tanto de especies como de seres humanos diferentes, ¿no? Entonces, estas historias comunes creo que nos llevaron a un grupo de activistas e investigadores que somos como Confluencias, a sentir de que los marcos con los cuales estábamos analizando los conflictos ambientales no eran suficientes, no podían realmente abarcar una realidad tan compleja, y pienso que es similar a lo que pasa en la India. Entonces son reflexiones que van naciendo desde nuestras experiencias, donde nos preguntamos que si venimos de pasados coloniales y hay estructuras coloniales dominantes fuertes, entonces necesitamos abordajes diferentes para poder entender la realidad de nuestros países. Y ahí surgen conceptos como la interculturalidad, por ejemplo, ¿no? Como la necesidad de poder entender esas estructuras de poder que se han dado y se han formado en nuestras naciones, en nuestros países, con distintas connotaciones, pero que son tremendamente difíciles de cambiar, porque están metidos muchas cosas en las estructuras sociales. Entonces, a raíz de eso es que va surgiendo la necesidad de pensar en marcos que nos permitan primero tener prácticas distintas. entonces es la necesidad de un marco conceptual que pueda ayudarte a interpretar una realidad tan compleja como la latinoamericana y que te posibilite tener, o sea, un marco que nazca de las prácticas, que es lo fundamental, que es un elemento importante del Grupo Confluencias, y que se traduzca en teorías que nos ayuden a avanzar en la transformación de nuestras realidades, que como te comenté hace rato son tremendamente complejas por todos los elementos que caracterizan a nuestra cultura. Entonces los marcos tradicionales de transformación de conflictos, en realidad de resolución, de manejo de conflictos, no eran suficientes para poder entender la intensidad de los procesos que vivimos como Latinoamérica. Y es así que nos reunimos hace ya 15 años como Grupo Confluencias, justamente a partir de esta necesidad. Y es un grupo muy diverso, Confluencias, gente que uno se dedica más a la academia, otros son mucho más dedicados al activismo, otros más facilitadores, pero en común tenemos nuestro trabajo de transformación de conflictos ambientales, ¿no? En distintos países de Latinoamérica, Argentina, Guatemala, Costa Rica, y bueno, es que sí que estamos avanzando poco a poco juntamente con los procesos que vivimos, ¿no? Democracias tremendamente intensas, donde se han estado dando cambios o transformaciones o reformas que es importante entenderlas de una forma más compleja, ¿no? No solamente desde lo político, desde lo cultural, sino que necesitan abordajes complejos.
So I think it's interesting because somewhat similar experience in India and how we developed. Do you want to add anything to what you said?
No, I have questions for you guys.
Okay.
Afterwards.
Yeah. So maybe just to explain a little bit about how we came up with ours. So as I mentioned, the Vikalp Sangam process of bringing organizations and movements together, and in that, I think what was also emerging was people, the communities or the civil society organizations or academics and others working with them and activists were saying, from all the practical experience on the ground, what is the larger framework of transformation towards a better society? What does it look like, and what would be the vision emerging from that? So that process started 3-4 years back, and then from that emerged something called the framework, the alternatives framework, which was looking at the kind of political, social, ecological, cultural, ecological transformation. So somewhat similar to what you mentioned about more comprehensive, holistic transformation. And then what we realized was a lot of people were asking, but how do we know whether something is an alternative? How do we know how comprehensive it is, etc.? And it's from that quest that we started working with people to say, okay, how do we have a tool for assessing ourselves, or for us helping movements to assess themselves or communities to assess themselves, to say, yes, we are doing really good work on transforming gender relationships, or we're doing very good work with protecting the forest, but are we sure we are working on multiple areas of justice? Are we sure that we are not actually making some other aspect worse? Typically, for instance, forest protection, the community might be doing very good, but it's the older men who are taking the decisions, and people who are really dependent on the forest might lose out, or the women are not part of the decision making. So out of that developed this idea that why don't we have a tool which helps us to assess comprehensively and how integrated our transformation is. So that's how the alternatives transformation format got developed, yes. And then we've used it in the last 1.5-2 years with the ACKnowl-EJ project, with weavers in Western India, looking at how transformation is taking place in their economic, social, cultural, political lives. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And is there anything in particular that has surprised you in using the framework in practice? What has been the most sort of revealing or unexpected aspect of that process of putting it into practice?
Well, I wouldn't say unexpected, but I would say that something that's come much more sharply to our notice is how transformation in one sphere can have significant impacts in others without the community necessarily even noticing that this is happening. but also how everything may not be happening in a positive direction. Some of those impacts might actually be negative. Just to give an example, with the weaving having revived, there's significant greater economic prosperity, there are very good social impacts, but like gender empowerment and youth empowerment, but at the same time economic inequality within the community itself is growing a little bit, as some are able to reach the market, others are getting left behind. So there are aspects like that which kind of came out, we didn't realize them, the community had not spoken about them, came out as part of the study, and I think that's that process of self-realization or assisted self-realization is something that I think has been quite powerful. What about you? I mean, when you use the conflict transformation framework, did something like that happen? Did the community itself realize something which it had not realized?
I'll say something and then I'll ask Mirna her. Well, in my case, there are two surprises. But I'll let Mirna answer your question. But my surprise with the framework was not. It's been in the journey of making it before applying it. So I mean, looking back now, we started in Grupo Confluencias 15 years ago, as Mirna said, trying to help people and ourselves understand and engage with conflicts in a more profound way. And we knew the power had to be in there, understanding power, hegemonic power, and changing power relations. We knew that culture had to be there. But we wanted a framework that would be, in a way, we thought that because people that were involved in confluences are trying to develop dialogues in different levels and with different actors, we thought it should be a framework that would be accessible to all players. And in the making, and once we started engaging with power, and because the issue of justice was at the core, we knew that we had to also contribute to creating justice. The more we engaged with power, the more it became evident that the framework really could not be used for everybody, or it shouldn't be directed to everybody. And the more we engaged with the issues of coloniality, the more it became clear that the framework had to start with what at the beginning, which is strengthening those actors that are in a more vulnerable position in conflicts. So in a way, our framework could have the limitation for people that want the framework to work for all and in all contexts, maybe in urban areas or in more modernized societies. Our framework is really thought, and it applies very, very well in an indigenous people's context, and it works well when you're actually looking at how the agency and the capacity of those actors to transform conflicts is increased through their actions. Now that's been a surprise because it's actually by dealing with power that we were forced to rethink the transformation from there. So that was a surprise. Now looking back, it's actually the whole process and the creation of that took us there. So do you want me to?
Yeah.
So Mirna now is going to answer what Ashish was asking about, the surprise factor.
Bueno, el mapa es más que todo un instrumento de análisis. Entonces, los procesos que con la aplicación del marco se han visto en Lomerío es procesos profundos de reflexión internos de las comunidades, porque tiene una mirada de proceso, entonces histórica, para atrás, para adelante, entonces eso ayuda mucho a reflexionar sobre sus estrategias, sus miradas. Han podido tener el espacio de tener una reflexión colectiva, ¿no? Entonces se ha constituido una herramienta para poder gestionar el conocimiento de las comunidades, porque los líderes están siempre pensando para adelante, avanzando, corriendo, y a ratos no tienen esa oportunidad de reflexionar. Entonces es un instrumento que ayuda a gestionar el conocimiento y a reflexionar y a preguntarse y cuestionarse qué es lo bueno qué es lo bueno que se está transformando y qué es lo que está todavía duro ahí sin lograr una transformación. Entonces creo que ese ha sido uno de los papeles del marco como un instrumento para la transformación en realidad en las comunidades, ¿no? O sea, una mirada bastante, primero local, y tal vez el poder ver la necesidad de proyectar a escalas también, ¿no? El caso, pero a veces uno se mete mucho en su caso y pierde la perspectiva, entonces ayuda mucho a ese nivel el marco.
One of the things that this surprised us also when we applied in the video was that the same in a way similar to yours, that you achieve transformation. It allows you to see that the great gains, achievements that you have reached with your struggles and trying to bring about change, but also where things are not really going all that well. That was surprising, and it's useful for communities to realize that. So when we did our workshop using the framework, and it gives clarity. So we didn't really ask, as you did, we don't go through the whole pillars and asking one by one, but we develop conversations around the issue. And so we asked, what have you gained through all your huge different variety of strategies that you have put in practice, but also what have you lost? And to our surprise, they started really there's really a very, very intensive brainstorming of ideas of all the things that they still have to work on to make sure that their struggles for autonomy, which is in the case of Lomeria and Bolivia, don't get lost on the way because of the huge amount of challenges that they have and pressures from different directions. So that was surprising to see how that came out so clearly in these conversations.
But in a way that kind of shows the usefulness of the framework itself, right? So it enables the community and those who are working with the community to actually realize things that in our normal day-to-day life we may not actually realize it's happening. The same thing which happened with the weavers in Kutch in Western India when we actually worked with them on the ecological impacts of the transformation in weaving or this issue of inequality, then discussions kind of began within the community, and hopefully those discussions might take them in a direction where some of the negative trends can also be dealt with even as the positive trends kind of continue. So that's interesting. I think it might also be useful to kind of dwell a little bit on how the two frameworks speak to each other. And the way I think they do, and you can tell me whether you think this is okay or not, is I think the conflict transformation framework is very strong on process, on the processes by which power is transformed in the various different dimensions that you have, the structural aspects of power, the relational aspects of power, the narratives and cultural aspects of power. And whereas the alternatives transformation format actually is not very strong on process. What it does is it says, okay, at this point in time, where has a community reached and how holistic or not is the transformation that it has achieved. It doesn't really, it can go into process only by asking for the question, saying, okay, how did you get here, what's your timeline, what's your history, etc. But it doesn't do that squarely within itself. And I'm thinking that if this is the case, then putting the two together in some way and working with a community kind of using both would actually could be potentially quite powerful. What do you think?
¿Qué piensas de la idea de que sería muy poderoso juntar a los dos marcos?
Yo creo que es necesario porque son instrumentos de acercamiento a la realidad, pero nuestra realidad es tan compleja que requiere de miradas y de complementariedades, ¿no? Entonces el marco de alternativas abarca lo holístico, y el marco de transformación que trabajamos como confluencias se enfoca en relaciones de poder que generalmente son y en indicadores, ¿no? Donde uno puede ver realmente si ha habido un cambio, una transformación. Entonces uno te ayuda a afinar la puntería, digamos, y el otro te da pues la mirada y la visión de la complejidad y lo holístico, que es fundamental para poder entender las alternativas de desarrollo, o sea, buscar alternativas distintas, ver que hay procesos que se están dando de forma distinta, ¿no? Entonces creo que ambos marcos dialoguen es importante, ¿no? Es necesario.
there's the other thing that alternative transformations frameworks complements ours very well is that it's the vision of alternative, because transforming conflict towards what? We have been very clear from our perspective that we have to engage with justice, and we have to help to reduce violence, and we have to contribute to creating intercultural relations in our pluricultural context in Latin America. And we know that we have to engage with development visions and all that, but the vision of alternatives to development as the end point or the direction it's something that it would really enrich our own perspective of the transformation, with giving more of a sense of direction in terms of sort of really engaging with the issues of modernity and decoloniality more strongly. This is something that's been fitting into our framework, but the vision, I think we can strengthen. The other way in which I think we could complement each other very well is now to start thinking of ways to I don't like to say measure, but more concrete ways of engaging with each one of those spheres. In your case, how do we really test or see or evaluate each one of those different spheres? In your case, your spheres are pillars. Because we ask broad questions, but it would be good to have more tangible ways of really evaluating how those changes are taking place, like you did with the ecological footprint. If in each one of those spheres we can find ways that are more specific to identify how and why those changes are or not taking place, and I think that's something that we could probably work together on really nicely.
So hopefully we can do something together using both frameworks in Bolivia and in India.
That would be great.
In the next couple of years or so, something like that. Yeah.
Ojalá podamos poder seguir trabajando en los dos países juntos, aplicando y creciendo juntos con estas metodologías.
Sí, seguro se va a dar. Estamos confluenciados.
Sí.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias, Ashish.
Thank you. Project.
No, se han reunido, ha estado en Santa Cruz, ha dado unas conferencias, presidente de la India. Que yo me presente a la India ya te está anunciando algo, ¿no? Porque los chinos estamos rebalsando de chinos. Así que la India también ha puesto su mirada y están en...
But Indian companies are not yet there.
Hay compañías indias.
Había una que quería entrar a explotar el mutún, el hierro, en la zona donde nosotros trabajamos. Pero por alguna razón eso no funcionó, es un proyecto grande el del mutún, ¿no? Pero se quedó muy parado eso y se lo dieron a una empresa china. Pero estos últimos meses ha llegado el presidente de la India, entonces ahí hay unas, y Evo ha estado también allá en Turquía, ha venido aquí a reuniones acá en Turquía, está su mirada bastante en estas zonas de más. Así que nos vamos a estar encontrando seguro.
She said that you'll be meeting each other more frequently,
Sí,
our presidents are engaging more.
Sí, la política india está llegando, ¿no?
I know that the Tatas and the Jindals, they're all trying to.
Who?
Our big companies, the Indian big corporations.
What are they called?
Tata, Jindals,
Tatas, sí,
Reliance.
hay bastantes tatas.
They're all trying to do something or the other. Tatas are trying for some mining, but I don't know whether they have anything in Latin America. Africa, yes.
Even in Australia,
Sí.
Adani's had a
Adani's
big
has-
in
The
Australia.
biggest coal mine in the world is being proposed by
Ya se ven
Indian
tatas.
corporation.
Really?
Se ven ya tatas. Sí, camiones.
She's seen trucks, Tata trucks.
Well, that could be because they make the trucks, so they,
Yeah.
yeah.